More than 5 years after the United Kingdom officially ceased to be a European Union country, a landmark summit is being held in London today, featuring EU chiefs with an eye to strengthen post-Brexit ties. Weeks before the big meeting, the tone was elated, with reports of Britain and the EU closing in on a new, long-anticipated defence and security pact expected to be formalised on 19th of May. However, days before the crucial meeting, talks seemed to hit a deadlock over fishing and student mobility. Still, how momentous is this meeting? Can the two parties recalibrate relations? And could the EU put a damper on Starmer's hoped-for Brexit reset? We'll get back to the matter with Euronews' correspondent Shona Murray in a few moments.
This is Radio Schuman, your go-to podcast to spice up your weekday with relevant news, in-depth analysis, insights, and behind the scenes from Brussels and beyond.
I'm your host, Lauren Walker. It's Monday, May the 19th. In this episode, we talk with Euronews reporter Shona Murray about Monday's EU-UK summit and whether the outcome will meet the high expectations set ahead of this landmark meeting. We'll also look at the fourth edition of the European Humanitarian Forum taking place in Brussels today, as dark clouds hang over the future of Western aid. And finally, which popular European holiday destinations are most overrun by tourists? But first, back to London, where UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is hosting EU chiefs. While the UK and EU have been close on matters related to Ukraine, this marks the first formal UK-EU summit since Brexit. The centrepiece of the summit will be a potential defence pact amid European security concerns and both sides facing common threats. This pact carries great significance for the UK, which is currently excluded from the EU's €150 billion Rearm Europe plan. Starmer previously made it clear that a security pact with the EU is one of the Labour government's priorities. Both sides are also expected to use this meeting to reach an understanding on what Starmer's desired wider Brexit reset would entail and to find common ground. However, this is complicated by potential obstacles which are surprisingly diverse, ranging from student mobility and food checks to some member states, spearheaded by France, tying any deal to guaranteed access for EU fishing fleets in British waters ahead of a deadline next year. Hi, Shona. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, how are you? You're welcome.
Regardless of negotiations and outcome, how significant is this summit 5 years since Brexit?
Yeah, it's totally significant given the bitterness that has passed throughout the Brexit process and how the UK moved so significantly away from its EU partners after being a member for nearly 50 years. And this is why I believe that despite the fact that there are negotiations coming up to the very beginning of the summit and things will take a while to be ironed out even over the weekend, that there will be some sort of a deal and there will be an agreement at it, because given the geopolitical situation we're in now, the UK and the European Union have agreed, really much affirmed that they need each other for security and that they are geographically located permanently beside each other. And not only that, it's not just a security issue, it's also a logical issue. I mean, well over 40% of the UK's trade is with the European Union, which makes sense, of course, because that's its nearest location.
And you touched slightly on it there, but what did the EU and the UK hope to get out of these talks when the summit was first announced?
Well, initially, really, it is about breaking down trade barriers. That would be the whole idea of ever the UK re-engaging with the European Union, to break down barriers so that from an agricultural perspective or fisheries or other industries, also services, they could be closer aligned and they could do work together without so much paperwork and so on. So that was the key issue. But obviously that has developed very much so to being a very important, imminent issue around security and defence and the industries of both. So the key takeaway, the key, I suppose, deliverable from this summit will be a security and defence partnership with the UK and the EU, meaning that the UK can then engage in the EU's REARM programme.
And several weeks ago, the tone surrounding the summit was quite positive, but the days before the meeting, we've heard that things have become slightly more tense and the preparations were becoming a bit more challenging. What caused the change in tone and what aspects of the negotiations have proven maybe particularly difficult?
I mean, no prizes for guessing what they are. It's because it's future access to British waters for the EU fishing industry, and no prizes for guessing because anyone who followed Brexit will remember that this was an issue that was disproportionately focused upon by Brexiteers, by the UK side and the EU side, because obviously it's a very important totemic issue and it's an important economic issue to certain parts of member states and of some parts of the UK. But from a perspective, when it comes to the whole of the UK economy or the EU economy, it's not as big. But anyway, that has been the issue leading up to the actual summit that had to be really worked out. The other issue, of course, was phytosanitary, and that would be essentially for access for British agriculture industry into the EU market by potentially aligning with EU standards, meaning that they could just move along a bit similar to what they did when they were in the European Union.
And maybe another controversial issue will be the extent to which the UK accepts, in very official speak, the dynamic regulatory coherence systems, or effectively agreeing to keep track with EU regulations. Do you think closer ties are possible if the UK does not agree?
Closer ties are possible, but I don't believe that an actual phytosanitary agreement will be delivered on the summit, but there will be an agreement to look at a phytosanitary deal. And I think also the EU member states will acknowledge that the UK has an issue when it comes to domestic politics, because as we know, the very, very pro-Brexit party Reform is doing well and did so in local elections recently, which may make Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, a little bit less confident in pushing something that's closer to the European Union, lest he suffer the wrath of all of those voters. Having said that, though, for a long time, the polls have showed that British people themselves have realised that Brexit wasn't the best thing for the British economy, and the facts don't lie in regard to that.
And maybe who's expected to make more concessions, and maybe to use this word, who's more desperate for a positive outcome?
Well, I don't think either side will say that they're desperate. And I don't think either. I mean, by the way, the issue of concessions is really down to it's like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? Because anybody could fudge something and decide what they got out of it. I think it has to be mutually, satisfactory, because no side wants to walk away saying that they didn't get what they wanted. But you have to remember as well, you've got 27 countries and a single market of 450 million people. And the UK is one country, 60 million people. So it's not comparable. But I think at the same time, the EU very much wants, students to be able to go into the UK. They do want access to the UK market, and they do want the UK to be involved in the European security industry, defence industry, because at the moment the capacity isn't quite there for the European Union as it's building up its capacity in relation to the war of Ukraine. And I think also they'd like to just, in the middle of such geopolitical tensions and disjointedness, it would be good for everybody, for the UK and the EU, to patch things up and to have a stronger relationship that was aligned and has a reason to strengthen in the future, rather than constantly moving away from each other, which is kind of what it's been like for the past few years, at least in the initial period of Brexit, when we saw, really difficult confrontations.
And then maybe finally, despite these negotiations on some slightly more difficult topics, both sides do seem quite set on having this agreement regarding defence. Do you think if no significant agreement or plans comes from anything in this meeting, do you think this can be considered a failure for the EU?
Well, there will be a security and defence partnership. So that is something that they'll just really hone in on. And that is needed, as if the reasons I mentioned, the two sides need to come together. The UK can access the European programmes and also help build capacity for Europe. So that will happen. I don't think that nobody's going to try and paint this as a failure. I think in and of itself, it is a success. But I think they really try to focus on what they did agree, and then they'll try to maybe say in the future we're looking at other things, and potentially, and I don't think they're going to say this, but I think that the Labour Party or Keir Starmer would like to see a potential UK access to the customs union, although I'm told that might be a generation away, or at least another election cycle away.
Thank you so much, Shona. Now a look at what else is on the agenda. Stakeholders from the humanitarian community and EU officials, including Haj Al Habib, will gather in Brussels today for the 4th European Humanitarian Forum. This year's edition takes place amidst escalating needs and shifting geopolitics on the one hand, and the West's sweeping cuts to humanitarian aid on the other. US President Donald Trump's administration cut more than 90% of USAID's foreign aid contracts, snapping the backbone of global humanitarian response. Many are now looking to Team Europe to fill the gap left by the US. However, in Europe too, the rhetoric is changing, as other major donor countries like Belgium, the Netherlands, and the UK are also in the process of substantially slashing foreign aid. NGOs will likely be seeking responses to the questions these issues pose this week. And finally, over to one of Euronews' top picks. Popular tourist destinations are bracing for the summer visitor influx, and in some cases, overtourism. While this term is synonymous with cities like Venice or Barcelona, a report by Which Travel suggests smaller European destinations are bearing the brunt. The Greek island of Zakynthos, or Zante, topped the list with a whopping 150-to-1 ratio of visitors to residents. It's followed by Istria in Croatia, which, despite being dubbed the country's best-kept secret, strains under the pressure of 133 visitors per local. Finally, the third most crowded destination is Fuerteventura on the Canary Islands. Visitors in this tourism hotspot, which is increasingly vocal about its struggle with overtourism, outnumber residents by 120-to-1. You can read the full story by Rebecca Ann Hughes on euronews.com. That's it for Radio Schuman today. I'm your host and producer Lauren Walker. Sound editing was done by David Brodheim and music by Alexandre Jass.
If you aren't already, you can listen to this series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Castbox, or wherever you get your podcasts.